A stone arch stands not by chance, but by calculation. This is the hidden language of numbers that built our world. By the end of this exploration, you will see every ancient monument as a solved equation, a story of stability written in geometry. The structural mathematics underlying monumental arch and corridor design is a silent code, a global constant found from Rome to Cambodia. How did builders without computers achieve such impossible precision? And why did so many cultures converge on the same sacred proportions? We are about to decode the blueprints of the past, revealing the universal principles that turned stone and mortar into eternal monuments. What forgotten truth about human ingenuity do you think these silent stones are trying to tell us? That silent code begins with a shape, a line, a ratio considered sacred. For ancient architects, the blueprint of the universe was not chaos but a perfect, repeating pattern of mathematics. They saw this order reflected in the spiral of a seashell, the arrangement of petals on a flower, and the unfurling arms of a galaxy. To build a monument that touched the heavens, they believed, one must first mirror this cosmic harmony on Earth. This is the realm of sacred geometry, where beauty is not a matter of opinion but a precise calculation. At its heart lies a single, extraordinary number often called the golden ratio, or phi. It is approximately 1.618, a proportion where a line is divided so that the longer part compared to the shorter part is the same as the whole line compared to the longer part. It sounds complex, but its effect is simple and profound. A rectangle built on this ratio possesses a balance that our eyes find instinctively pleasing, a natural stability. This ratio generates a sequence of numbers known as the Fibonacci sequence, where each number is the sum of the two before it, creating a pattern that grows in perfect phi proportion. These were not just abstract ideas for scholars, they were the practical tools of the master builder. The Roman architect Vitruvius wrote extensively that a building must imitate the symmetry of the human form, which itself is built upon these divine proportions. For him and for countless cultures, mathematical perfection was the very definition of beauty and strength. So when an architect laid out the ground plan for a temple or the soaring curve of an arch, they often began with this invisible grid of harmony. The Parthenon in Greece is famously framed by golden rectangles. The corridors and nave of Chartres Cathedral in France follow these proportional rules. This was not merely for decoration. A structure built on these principles achieved a deeper integrity. The weight of stone, the thrust of an arch, the distribution of forces all found a natural equilibrium within this mathematical framework. It created a skeleton of stability that felt inherently right, long before the physics of stress and strain were fully understood. The monument was not just built, it was composed like a symphony in stone. And this universal score of proportions set the stage for every engineering challenge that followed. That mathematical symphony in stone found its most powerful instrument in a single, elegant curve. To understand this, we must step back to a world before the arch, a world of limitations. The simplest way to span an opening is with a straight, horizontal beam resting on two posts, what we call post and lintel construction. Think of the massive stone doorways of Stonehenge or the entrance to an ancient Greek temple. It works, but it has a fundamental weakness. The entire weight of the wall above that beam presses straight down upon it. The beam can only span a limited distance before it cracks under its own weight and the load it carries. The materials themselves become the limit. For centuries, this was the ceiling, quite literally, of architectural ambition. Then a revolution in thought occurred, not with a new material, but with a new shape. Someone realized that by arranging stones in a curved formation, they could redirect force in a miraculous way. This was the birth of the arch, and it represents one of humanity's greatest leaps in structural mathematics. The Romans did not invent the arch, but they perfected it and built an empire upon its principles. Look at any surviving Roman aqueduct like the Pont du Gard in France. Its grandeur comes not from solid walls, but from repeating rows of graceful, semicircular stone arches marching across the landscape. Each arch is a masterpiece of distributed force. Instead of weight pushing straight down onto a weak point, the curve of the arch takes that vertical load and transforms it. The weight is channeled along the curved line of the stones, pushing outward and downward at an angle towards the supports on either side. This outward push is called thrust. To visualize this, try pressing down on the top of a cardboard arch. You will feel the sides want to bulge outward. That is the thrust in action. The genius of the arch lies in managing this force. Every arch is a carefully assembled puzzle. The individual wedge-shaped stones are called voussoirs. They are cut with such precision that when placed together, each one leans on its neighbor, locking them all in place. The central, topmost stone is the keystone. It is often said to lock the whole structure together, but in truth, every stone is essential. The final piece of the puzzle is the impost, the base or platform upon which the ends of the arch rest. This is where the redirected force, that outward and downward thrust, is finally delivered into the ground or into a massive supporting pier. For the arch to stand, a critical rule must be followed. The line of thrust, the invisible path that the force travels through the stone, must remain completely within the masonry of the arch itself. If that line of force ever drifts outside the physical stone, even for a moment, the arch will hinge and collapse. Modern structural engineers analyze this line with advanced software, but Roman builders understood it through geometry, trial, and a deep, intuitive grasp of proportion. By mastering this principle, they shattered the old limits. Wider river crossings became possible. Vast interior spaces, free of central columns, could be enclosed. The arch allowed for taller, stronger, and more open structures, fundamentally reshaping the skyline of the ancient world. It was the key that unlocked the next chapter of monumental design, leading to the creation of immense, soaring ceilings that seemed to defy gravity itself. But an arch is only a doorway, a moment of transition. The true journey begins when you step inside, into the channeled space of a corridor. Here, architecture stops being a static object and becomes a dynamic experience, a carefully calculated path that guides you physically and emotionally. While arches mastered the science of standing still, corridors mastered the psychology of movement. Think of the long, dimly lit hallway leading to the inner sanctum of an Egyptian temple, like at Karnak. Its purpose was not just to get you from point A to point B. Its design was a mathematical script for building anticipation, narrowing your world, and focusing your entire being toward the sacred space ahead. This is the second principle, the mathematics of corridor dynamics, where space itself is composed to control perception. The master builders manipulated three key geometric variables to craft this experience: width, height, and rhythm. The ratio between a corridor's width and its height is the first control. A low, narrow passage forces a sense of compression and intimacy, making you feel the weight of the structure. A tall, narrow corridor, like those in Gothic cathedrals, pulls your gaze irresistibly upward, creating a feeling of aspiration. The builders chose these proportions deliberately, often aligning them with the same sacred ratios used in their arches to evoke a specific emotional response before you even reached your destination. Then comes rhythm, the repetitive beat of architecture. This is where mathematics meets music. Along a corridor, builders placed columns, piers, or niches at regular intervals. This repetition is not random. It is often based on harmonic intervals, simple whole number ratios like 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, which the human brain finds inherently pleasing and orderly. As you walk, this rhythmic pattern creates a predictable, almost hypnotic pace. It makes the journey feel measured and significant, turning a simple walk into a procession. Finally, they employed perspective as a tool of illusion. By subtly tapering a corridor, making it slightly narrower at the far end than at the entrance, or by adjusting the height of a ceiling, they could create a forced perspective. This trick of geometry made a space appear much longer or more focused than it physically was, amplifying the sense of awe and making the endpoint seem both distant and monumental. Your eye is literally drawn down the path they designed you to follow. These corridors were never just connectors, they were narrative devices in stone. They were the slow, rising tension in a story, the quiet verse before a chorus, preparing the visitor for the revelation of the grand interior space that awaited. And when that final doorway was passed, all these principles of arch and corridor would fuse into a single, breathtaking volume of engineered space. The true power of the arch was unleashed not by stone alone, but by a liquid stone that could take any shape. The Romans perfected a formula for concrete, a mix of volcanic ash, lime, and rubble that hardened into a monolithic, incredibly durable mass. This material revolution fused with their geometric genius to create structures of unprecedented ambition. With concrete, they were no longer limited to carving or stacking. They could pour, they could mold curves within curves and create vast, unsupported interior spaces that stone block construction could never achieve. This synthesis of fluid material and rigid mathematics found one of its most iconic expressions in the Triumphal Arch. These were not mere gateways, they were three-dimensional proclamations in stone and mortar, celebrating military victory and imperial authority. Their design was a geometric manifesto. Take the Arch of Constantine standing beside the Colosseum in Rome. Its form is a masterclass in harmonic proportion. At its core is a large central archway, the main passage of honor. Flanking it on either side are two smaller, yet perfectly proportional, archways. The relationship between these three openings is not random. The width and height of the central arch often relate to the smaller arches through simple, pleasing ratios, like 1:2 or 3:5, creating visual rhythm and balance. But the geometry goes deeper into the third dimension. The arch is not a flat facade, it has significant depth. The relationship between its total width, its height from ground to top, and its depth forward creates a solid, stable volume that feels anchored and monumental from every angle. This precise geometric composition was made physically possible by Roman concrete. The core of the arch, the unseen bulk behind the elegant marble facing, was often this poured concrete. It allowed the builders to create that substantial depth and complex internal structure without relying on impossibly large stone blocks. The concrete provided a unified, strong heart, while the cut stone facing displayed the precise geometry and lavish decoration. This fusion served a dual purpose. Engineering and ideology became one. The arch stood for centuries because its mathematics were sound, its material was resilient. And by standing for centuries, it perpetually communicated the strength and permanence of the empire it celebrated. The concrete embedded the geometric ideals, making the monument itself a durable lesson in power. The Triumphal Arch became a template copied across the empire, demonstrating how structural mathematics could be employed not just to support weight, but to support an idea. This template of calculated grandeur would travel far beyond Rome, evolving in the hands of different cultures to solve even greater architectural challenges. The Roman arch, a declaration of earthly power, would evolve into a prayer carved in stone. Across Europe, a new architectural language emerged, one that sought not to dominate the landscape but to dissolve it, replacing walls of stone with walls of light. This was the Gothic ascendancy, and its primary tool was a simple geometric modification with profound consequences, the pointed arch. While the Roman semicircle is a constant curve, the Gothic ogive is built from two arcs that meet at a sharp peak. This seemingly small change revolutionized structural mathematics. The pointed arch is a more efficient shape for channeling weight. In a semicircular arch, the line of thrust pushes outward at a relatively low angle, requiring massive piers and thick walls to contain that lateral force. But the pointed arch, with its steeper sides, directs that line of thrust more vertically, downward into the ground. This meant the outward thrust was significantly reduced. The walls no longer needed to be thick fortresses. They could become slender, elegant cages of stone. This single geometric innovation unlocked the vertical ambition of the Gothic masters. They could now build taller, reaching for the heavens with a skeletal lightness that seemed to defy the very nature of masonry. But the pointed arch was only the beginning of this stone calculus. The true genius lay in how these arches were multiplied and interconnected overhead in the creation of the rib vault. Imagine two pointed arches crossing each other at right angles like the ribs of an umbrella. This intersection creates four triangular compartments or webs. The ribs form a rigid skeletal framework, and the stone webs are laid thinly between them. This system is brilliantly efficient. The ribs carry the main load of the vault down to slender columns below, while the webs simply fill the space. It is a perfect distribution of labor, a mathematical partitioning of weight and support. Designing these complex three-dimensional geometries required a master mason's own form of calculus, performed not with equations but with compasses and chalk on a large, flat tracing floor. On this stone canvas, they would plot the full-scale profiles of arches, the curves of ribs, and the intricate patterns of vaults. Every intersection, every angle, every radius was worked out in precise, full-scale geometric drawings before a single stone was cut. This was architecture as applied sacred geometry, a direct translation of mathematical harmony into three-dimensional space. The ultimate reward of this stone framework was emptiness. With a weight so efficiently carried by the ribs and columns, the walls between them were liberated from their load-bearing duty. They could be opened up, filled not with more stone, but with colossal windows. The solid wall became a luminous screen of stained glass, a mosaic of colored light telling sacred stories. This was no happy accident. It was the final, breathtaking goal of the entire mathematical orchestration. The structure itself was engineered to become a vessel for divine illumination. The calculus of the pointed arch and the rib vault solved a profound spiritual equation: how to build a mountain of stone that felt weightless, how to construct a boundary that was made of light. In these cathedrals, structural mathematics achieved a sublime purpose, proving that the most solid forms could be designed to elevate the human spirit toward the infinite. Yet while the pointed arch soared in Europe, another ancient and more mysterious form was being perfected across the ocean. This is the story of the Corbeled arch, a global architectural puzzle that reveals a different kind of genius. You can find its distinctive silhouette in the dark heart of a Neolithic tomb in Scotland and at the summit of a Mayan pyramid in Guatemala. It is built not from elegant, wedge-shaped curves, but through a patient, incremental process of stacking. Each horizontal layer of stone is placed so it projects slightly, just an inch or two, beyond the layer below it. Slowly, over many courses, the two walls lean inward until they finally meet at the top, forming a rough, inverted V or a step tunnel. It is a quieter, more cautious technology than the Roman arch, yet its very existence poses a profound question. How did cultures separated by vast oceans and millennia, with no evidence of contact, all arrive at this same intricate solution for spanning a space? The answer lies not in shared blueprints, but in a shared confrontation with gravity. The mathematics of the Corbeled arch is a constant, delicate negotiation with balance. The principle is one of cantilevering, where each projecting stone is like a person leaning further and further out over a ledge. The critical rule is that the center of gravity, the average location of the structure's weight, must always remain directly over the supporting base below. If the builders projected a stone too far, the entire stack would become unstable and topple inward. This required an intuitive yet precise understanding of load distribution. The Mayan architects at places like Tikal mastered this to an astonishing degree. Their corbelled vaults, often used in temple roofs and narrow passages, are marvels of geometric stacking. They understood that the angle of inward lean had to be consistent and carefully calculated. The weight of each new stone not only had to be supported by the one beneath it, but also had to counterbalance the thrust of the opposite wall, creating a state of tense, locked equilibrium. This same intuitive calculus was applied thousands of years earlier and thousands of miles away, in tombs like Micho in Scotland's Orkney Islands. Built over 4,000 years ago, its entrance passage is a long, dark corridor roofed by massive, precisely corbelled stone slabs. The builders here, too, understood that stability came from ensuring the immense weight overhead was always channeled down through the walls, never allowed to drift outside that invisible line. This phenomenon is what scholars call convergent evolution in architecture. Just as wings evolved independently in birds, bats, and insects to solve the problem of flight, the corbelled arch emerged independently across the world to solve the problem of the ceiling. It represents a fundamental stage in humanity's experimental dialogue with form and stability. It is the architectural equivalent of a deep, shared instinct, a testament to a universal human urge to push stone beyond its apparent limits through patience and geometric intuition. The corbelled arch may not have the sweeping grace of its Roman successor, but in its humble, stacked layers we see the first bold chapters of a global story, written in the silent language of balance and weight. But this dialogue with gravity was not the only path. While some cultures built with the weight of the world, others sought to dissolve it entirely through a dance of pure geometry. In the mosques and palaces of the Islamic world, structural mathematics achieved a state of sublime paradox, creating ceilings that appeared to defy not just gravity, but the very nature of solid matter. This is the world of the Muqarnas, a form of vaulting so intricate it seems like a frozen honeycomb or a petrified cascade of stone icicles. To stand beneath it is to feel the architecture breathe with a rhythmic, infinite complexity. The Muqarnas is not merely decoration applied to a surface, it is the surface itself, generated entirely from a deep and profound geometric logic. It begins with the most fundamental of shapes, the square and the octagon. Master architects developed a repeatable algorithm, a set of geometric rules for how these flat, two-dimensional shapes could be transformed into three-dimensional cells. Imagine a flat, square panel. Now visualize it subdivided into smaller squares, and then each of those squares is given depth, folded upward into a miniature, pointed niche or a tiny, faceted dome. These individual cells, called alveoles, are then combined, mirrored, and rotated. They stack and interlock in tiers, each layer projecting further inward than the one below, following a precise mathematical progression. This is a process of infinite geometric regression, where a simple starting rule iterates itself into breathtaking complexity. The square begets smaller squares, which beget even smaller ones, creating a visual rhythm that pulls the eye upward and inward, suggesting a pattern that could continue forever. This was the entire purpose. In the philosophy of Islamic sacred art, which avoids figurative representation, geometry becomes the direct language of the divine. The repeating, subdivided patterns of the Muqarnas served as a visual metaphor for the infinite complexity and unity of creation, a tangible expression of a universe endlessly unfolding from a single, perfect source. The solid stone of the ceiling or dome is dematerialized, transformed into a shimmering, celestial canopy that seems to hover weightlessly. It challenges our most basic perception. Where does the supporting structure end and the ornament begin? In the Muqarnas, they are one and the same. The mathematics is not a hidden framework buried within the walls. It is the visible, artistic skin of the space. This application represents a pinnacle of architectural thought, where engineering and art fuse into a single discipline. The Muqarnas does not just hold up the roof, it explains the cosmos. It turns the act of looking upward into an act of contemplation, proving that the most advanced mathematics could be employed not to conquer space, but to illuminate it from within. Geometry could shape more than sight, it could conduct sound itself. Within the silent stone of certain monuments lies a hidden auditory dimension, a secret whispered from one age to another. Walk into the great dome of St. Paul's Cathedral in London, and you will find a strange acoustic miracle. Stand against the wall on one side of the circular gallery, whisper a sentence facing the stone, and a person standing against the wall directly opposite, over 100 feet away, will hear your words with startling clarity. This is the Whispering Gallery, and its magic is not magic at all, but a precise application of mathematics to the physics of sound. The phenomenon depends entirely on the perfect, continuous curve of the dome or arched corridor. When you whisper, the sound waves you produce travel outward in all directions. On a flat wall, most of that sound scatters and dissipates, but on a smooth, concave surface like the inside of a sphere or a long barrel vault, something extraordinary happens. The curve acts like a series of interconnected mirrors for sound. Each point on the wall reflects the incoming whisper, not randomly, but at the same angle at which it arrived, a principle known as specular reflection. Because the surface is curved, these reflected sound waves are focused and channeled. They travel along the wall, clinging to the surface in a tight beam, converging and reconverging as they go. This creates what physicists call a caustic curve, a focal line where the sound energy is concentrated. In a perfectly spherical dome, this caustic is a complete circle that runs around the interior, right along the base of the dome where a gallery often sits. Any whisper directed along this tangent will be captured and carried along this invisible acoustic highway, losing very little energy to the open space in the middle. The mathematics governing this are precise, involving the radius of curvature and the wavelength of sound. The builders may not have articulated it in modern terms, but through trial, observation, and geometric intuition, they mastered it. This intentional acoustics appear in sacred spaces across cultures. The Temple of Heaven in Beijing features the Imperial Vault of Heaven, a circular hall with a magnificent dome. A whisper at one side travels clearly around the perimeter to the other, a phenomenon once used in ceremonial rituals. In the ancient Greek theater of Epidaurus, the famed acoustics that carry a pin drop from the stage to the top row are a related feat of geometry, where the stepped semicircle reflects sound upward in a controlled manner. These were not happy accidents. They represent a sophisticated, multi-sensory layer of architectural design. The space was engineered to be a resonant instrument, amplifying not just power or light, but the human voice. For ritualistic or oracular purposes, this would have been transformative. Imagine a priest or a speaker standing at one focal point, their quiet pronouncements carried with supernatural clarity to a specific listener or another priest at the opposite focal point. It would seem like the very stones were speaking, that the architecture itself was delivering a divine message. This turns the monument from a static object into an interactive, almost living entity. It reveals that ancient master builders thought in dimensions beyond the visual. They composed with geometry to choreograph an entire experience, where the path of a whisper was as carefully calculated as the thrust of an arch. In these spaces, mathematics did not just hold up the ceiling, it wrote the script for the echoes that would fill it for centuries. Yet the same mathematics that built whispering galleries for sacred messages could also design a brutal, silent efficiency for defense. In the realm of medieval castles and fortresses, structural geometry served a grimly practical purpose, where every arch and corridor was calculated not for enlightenment but for survival. The soaring principles of sacred proportion were bent to a new, unforgiving logic, the geometry of fortification. Here, the arch was no longer a gateway to the divine, but a deadly funnel, a meticulously engineered trap. The design of a castle gatehouse was a masterclass in applied mathematics, a sequence of architectural puzzles with one solution: the controlled defeat of any attacker. Consider the bent entrance, also known as a barbican. This was not a straight, welcoming passage. Instead, the approach was forced into a sharp right-angle turn, often within a narrow, vaulted corridor. This geometric trick served multiple tactical functions. It prevented a besieging force from gathering momentum for a battering ram, as they could not get a running charge in a tight corner. More critically, it broke the line of sight for archers outside, while exposing the attacking soldiers, now slowed and compressed, to multiple lines of fire from defensive positions above and to the sides. The very shape of the path dictated the pace and vulnerability of anyone who entered. Even the smallest apertures in the stone were governed by precise calculation. Look at an arrow slit or embrasure. From the outside, it appears as nothing more than a thin, vertical crack in the wall, a nearly impossible target for an enemy archer to hit. But from inside the castle, the slit widens dramatically into a splayed chamber. This funnel shape was not random. Its angles were carefully calculated to provide the defending archer inside with a wide field of fire, a broad arc of coverage to shoot through, while their body remained shrouded in shadow and protected by the thick stone. The geometry created a cone of offensive opportunity from a point of near-perfect defensive safety. This mathematical foresight extended even to the ceilings. In the vaulted passage of a gatehouse directly above the most constricted choke point, you would often find murder holes. These openings in the vault stonework were not placed arbitrarily. Their alignment was precise, situated directly over the spot where invading soldiers would be most densely packed and helpless, trapped between a sealed inner portcullis and a closed outer gate. From these holes, defenders could drop stones, pour heated sand, or other materials down upon the trapped force below. The placement relied on an understanding of spatial geometry, ensuring the holes were centered over the kill zone for maximum effect. In these formidable structures, the elegant principles of arch thrust and load distribution served a stark new master. The same understanding that kept a cathedral vault aloft was used to ensure a gatehouse passage could withstand bombardment while channeling and exposing its enemies. This duality reveals the full spectrum of structural mathematics. It was a universal language, as capable of composing a hymn in light and stone as it was of writing a stark equation for defense. The stones of a fortress tell us that this hidden code was never just about beauty or belief. It was ultimately about power, control, and the resilient, calculating mind of the builder facing the pressures of their world. The geometry of war and worship found its ultimate synthesis in a single, restless mind. Centuries after castle walls were built and Gothic spires completed, a new era dawned that sought not to abandon the ancient mathematical code, but to decode it completely. This was the Renaissance, a rebirth of classical learning fueled by a profound conviction that the universe operated on rational, measurable principles that humanity could master. At the heart of this movement stood a figure who embodied its spirit, Leonardo da Vinci. For Leonardo, architecture was not merely construction. It was frozen music, a physical manifestation of harmonic ratios. His famous sketch of the Vitruvian man, a figure perfectly inscribed within a circle and a square, is far more than an artistic icon. It is a philosophical manifesto, a blueprint for a new architectural theory rooted in the human form itself. Leonardo was deeply studying the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, who had written that a well-designed building must mirror the proportions of the human body. Where Vitruvius stated the principle, Leonardo demonstrated it with empirical precision. In his notebooks, he meticulously calculated the ideal proportions, noting how the span of a man's arms equals his height, creating that perfect square, and how the navel forms the center of a circle drawn around him. This was the foundational geometry. Leonardo then applied this living mathematics directly to his architectural sketches. His designs for centralized churches, based on the same circle and square that framed the Vitruvian man, were intended to create spaces of perfect geometric unity. The plan of the building itself would resonate with the proportions of the people standing within it, creating an unconscious harmony between inhabitant and environment. This was a revolutionary shift. It moved sacred geometry from a cosmic abstraction to a human-centered science. The building was no longer just an imitation of celestial order. It became an extension of the human body, scaled to its logic and designed for its experience. Leonardo's visionary plans for an ideal city reveal this fusion at an urban scale. He designed these cities with a dual network, one level for the nobility and clean air, and a lower, subterranean level for services, waste, and transportation. While never built, the plans show a mind applying geometric order and proportional reasoning to solve practical problems of health, circulation, and social structure. The streets were to be wide and based on specific ratios to allow for light and airflow, while the buildings themselves would adhere to harmonious facades. This conceptual leap bridged two worlds. It connected the cosmic ideals of the ancients, who saw number as the language of the gods, with the emerging empirical worldview that trusted observation, measurement, and human reason as the path to truth. In Leonardo's vision, the stable arch and the dynamic corridor were not just structural necessities. They were the bones and veins of a body made of stone, composed according to the same mathematical music that governed life itself. His work posed a tantalizing question that would echo through the centuries. If our buildings are designed from the mathematics of our own bodies, what does that say about the world we are truly trying to construct? Leonardo's human-centered geometry sought to harmonize the spirit, but other builders wielded mathematics for a far more visceral purpose, to deliberately reshape the mind itself. This brings us to one of the most haunting applications of architectural form, the enigma of the elongated corridor. In structures across the ancient world, we find passages that defy any practical explanation for their staggering length and unnerving narrowness. They were not designed for efficient traffic, but for a calculated psychological assault. The mathematics of these spaces is a formula for altered consciousness. A prime and profound example lies deep beneath the sands of Saqqara in Egypt at the Serapeum. This is not a temple for the living, but a silent necropolis for the sacred Apis bulls. To reach its heart, one must descend into a long, perfectly straight subterranean tunnel. The corridor stretches into absolute darkness, its walls unadorned, its width unchanging. Lining this passage are enormous side chambers, each containing a single, monolithic sarcophagus carved from a single block of granite, weighing over 60 tons. The engineering to place these behemoths here is itself a marvel, but the true genius lies in the empty space between them, in the corridor itself. Its design follows a brutal, simple arithmetic, length and width. The relentless, unbroken perspective creates a powerful, inescapable effect. As you walk, the world you left behind vanishes. The only reality becomes the diminishing point of light behind you and the consuming darkness ahead. The uniform width offers no variation, no landmark, no break in the monotony. This sensory deprivation, engineered by pure geometry, induces a profound state of disorientation and focused contemplation. Your sense of time distorts, your awareness turns inward. The corridor becomes a psychological threshold, a calculated journey that strips away the mundane self. This was no accident. For the priests performing funerary rites or initiation ceremonies, this passage was an essential tool. The mathematical dimensions of the tunnel were a script for spiritual transformation. The long, narrow path served as a symbolic birth canal into the realm of the sacred, or a final, separating journey into the world of the honored departed. The architecture itself performed the ritual, guiding participants into a required state of mind before they ever reached the ceremonial chamber. This principle appears in many forms. The dark, narrow dromos passages leading into Mycenaean tholos tombs create the same compressed transitional feeling. Certain labyrinthine structures in Minoan Crete use elongated, turning corridors not to confuse, but to deliberately pace and prepare the initiate for revelation. In these spaces, numbers transcend measurement. They become active agents. The precise ratio of length to width, the unyielding straightness, the oppressive ceiling height, these were variables in an equation meant to solve for awe, for fear, for transcendence. The builders understood that to change a person's belief, you must first change their perception of reality. And what more direct way to do that than to build the very container of their experience? The corridor, therefore, ceases to be mere architecture. It becomes a machine for the mind, a geometric ritual that begins the moment you step inside, proving that the most enduring monuments were often designed not just for the body, but for the soul's difficult passage. These elongated corridors were a geometry of the mind, but the monuments themselves often held a more universal code. Beyond the practical curves and angles, ancient architects repeatedly returned to a handful of specific, extraordinary numbers, numbers that cannot be expressed as a simple fraction. They are infinite and patternless, yet they govern the shapes of nature itself. The most famous of these are pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, and phi, the golden ratio we encountered earlier. Their persistent appearance in structures from Giza to Greece sparks a profound debate. Were these precise mathematical constants deliberately encoded as sacred messages, or are they simply the inevitable byproduct of using certain basic, reliable construction techniques? The evidence suggests a fascinating blend of both practical necessity and cosmic intention. Take the Great Pyramid of Giza. If you take the pyramid's original height and multiply it by 2 times pi, you get a figure remarkably close to the length of its base perimeter. Conversely, if you take the perimeter of the base and divide it by twice the height, you approximate pi. This relationship is mathematically elegant, implying the builders designed the pyramid with this universal constant in mind, perhaps as a symbolic representation of the circle's perfection within a square plan, a union of earth and sky. However, a compelling counter-argument exists. If you build a pyramid using a simple, repeatable sect or slope angle, a specific ratio between the horizontal run and vertical rise, the mathematics naturally produce a pyramid whose shape incorporates pi. It emerges from the geometry of the chosen angle. So, did the architects intend to encode pi, or did pi simply emerge from their practical, replicable building method? The answer may be that in the ancient worldview, this distinction did not exist. The reliable technique that produced a stable, eternal structure was the cosmic principle in action. The number was not just a tool, it was a divine signature. We see this philosophical fusion in classical Greece as well. The Parthenon's facade is famously analyzed as a series of overlapping golden rectangles, and the spacing of its columns relates to harmonic proportions. Yet the builders likely used simpler iterative tools like the compass and straightedge to generate these proportions through geometric construction rather than numeric calculation. Drawing a pentagram, for instance, automatically generates the golden ratio throughout its lines. The act of constructing the perfect shape invoked the sacred number. This is where the hidden language truly resides. These irrational numbers, pi and phi, were seen as more than mathematical curiosities. they were considered the underlying framework of creation, found in the spirals of galaxies and the growth patterns of plants. To embed them into a temple or tomb was to align that human-made structure with the fundamental order of the cosmos. It was an act of sympathetic magic on a monumental scale, a way to ensure the building's stability and significance by weaving it into the very fabric of reality. The builder, therefore, was both an engineer and a priest, using rope and ruler to write a prayer in stone, a prayer that said, "As above, so below." The monument became a permanent anchor point, tying the earthly realm to the eternal, unchanging laws of the universe through the silent, infinite language of number. Yet these cosmic numbers required earthly hands to bring them into being. How did a master mason, standing on a windswept plain or deep within a quarry, translate an infinite ratio like phi into the exact cut of a stone? The answer lies not in complex machinery, but in an elegant toolkit of simple tools and profound geometric truths, accessible to anyone with a keen eye and a length of rope. The architect's true power resided in these humble instruments, each one a key to unlocking precision on a monumental scale. The first and perhaps most vital tool was a simple rope, knotted at regular intervals. With this, a builder could guarantee the single most important element of stable construction, the perfect right angle. They employed a timeless rule known as the 3-4-5 triangle. By tying knots 12 equal spaces apart, they created a loop. 3 men would then each hold a knot, stretching the rope taut into a triangle with sides of 3 units, 4 units, and 5 units. The magic of geometry dictates that a triangle with these proportions must contain a right angle between the 3 and 4 unit sides. This was how they squared the corners of temples and laid out the vast, perpendicular foundations of pyramids, ensuring the entire structure was geometrically true from its very first course. For curves and circles, they turned to the compass, a tool as simple as a peg and a string. A sharpened stake driven into the ground became the center point. A length of rope kept taut became the fixed radius. By walking this radius around the center, a worker could scribe a perfect circle onto the earth, the foundational plan for a round temple, a dome, or the graceful arc of an arch. To ensure a level surface, essential for distributing weight evenly, they used a leveling plane. This was often a long, straight wooden beam with a groove carved along its top. Water poured into the groove would find its own level, showing the builder exactly where to add or remove material to create a perfectly flat plane, whether for a floor, a foundation, or the bed for a massive lintel. But how did a small, detailed design become a building the size of a mountain? The secret was modular planning and proportional grids. A master mason would first create a small, precise scale model or a full-size drawing on a flat plaster or stone tracing floor. This drawing was overlaid with a grid of squares. Each element of the design occupied a specific number of grid squares. To scale the design up to the real monument, workers simply transposed this grid onto the construction site at a much larger size. If a column in the drawing was 2 squares tall and 1 square wide, on the ground it would be built to match the new, larger dimensions of the scaled-up grid. This method ensured that every proportion, every relationship between parts was preserved perfectly, regardless of final size. This entire body of knowledge was not written in textbooks for public study. It was a living science passed down through generations within the closed circles of mason guilds. Apprentices learned through hands-on practice, mixing mortar, dressing stone, and gradually being entrusted with the sacred tools and the geometric secrets they held. This blend of empirical knowledge, tested by centuries of trial and error, and guarded tradition, created an unbroken chain of expertise. It demystifies their achievements, showing that the breathtaking precision of ancient monuments did not spring from alien technology or lost magic. It was the result of brilliant yet fundamentally accessible applications of geometry. These builders understood the eternal truths of shape and force, and with nothing more than rope, compass, and a leveled gaze, they wrote those truths in stone for the ages. The rope and compass built truth, but sometimes the greatest power lay in a beautiful lie. This is the realm of structural deception, where mathematics was wielded not to reveal reality, but to reshape it before our very eyes. Architects became magicians of perception, using geometry to craft illusions of impossible scale and grandeur. Their most potent trick was forced perspective, a system of calculated distortions applied to three-dimensional space. To understand its power, walk the steps of the Scala Regia, the royal staircase in the Vatican. Designed by Gian Lorenzo Bernini in the 17th century, this corridor is a masterpiece of architectural sleight of hand. The challenge was spatial and symbolic, to create a processional path toward the papal apartments that felt infinitely majestic within a cramped, irregular site. Bernini's solution was pure mathematical theater. As you ascend, the hallway itself subtly narrows. The columns lining the sides become progressively smaller. The floor rises at an increasing pitch. This is not a consistent tunnel, but a precisely engineered funnel of vision. Our brains are wired to interpret converging lines as receding into the distance. Bernini took this principle of linear perspective, developed by Renaissance painters to create depth on a flat canvas, and built it in stone. The converging walls and diminishing columns create a powerful illusion that the staircase is far longer and taller than it physically is. The intended endpoint, the doorway to the papal chambers, seems to rush away from you, amplifying its importance and the sense of journey. You are not just walking upstairs, you are being pulled by geometry into a narrative of ascent. This manipulation extends beyond simple length. The entire space is a calculated gradient of proportion, compressing the viewer at the entrance and expanding the perceived glory of the destination. Every element, from the width between columns to the height of each step, is a variable in an equation solved for awe. The architecture actively participates in the experience, becoming a dynamic force that choreographs your emotions, building anticipation with every calculated footfall. This theatrical use of geometry was not unique to Bernini. We see it in the sloping floors and tapered walls of ancient Egyptian temples, designed to make the inner sanctum feel more secluded and sacred. We see it in the grand courtyards of Baroque palaces, where pathways narrow or widen to control the drama of approach. The mathematics of forced perspective served a clear purpose: to direct focus and manufacture majesty. It allowed a builder with limited physical space to create unlimited psychological space. The monument no longer just was, it performed. It used the immutable laws of lines and ratios to tell a persuasive story about power, divinity, or order, making the viewer a willing participant in an illusion they could feel in their bones. In these spaces, you do not just see the architecture, you are persuaded by it. That architectural theater of illusion finds its most profound expression not in a trick of the eye, but in a complete reimagining of the sky. The dome represents the ultimate synthesis of arch and corridor, a three-dimensional revolution that turns the very ceiling into a vast interior landscape of space. It is the arch spun fully around its center, creating a perfect, continuous curve that encloses a volume without a single corner or column. This was the final, breathtaking leap in the ancient dialogue with gravity, and its purest surviving testament is the Pantheon in Rome. For over 1900 years, its unreinforced concrete dome has stood as a silent sermon in mathematics, a feat that modern engineers still regard with a mixture of awe and analytical wonder. The challenge was unprecedented: to span a circular space over 142 feet in diameter with a dome of solid concrete. The architects had to solve a new equation of forces. A dome is not a static lid, it is a dynamic shell. The weight of the material creates immense compressive stress that pushes downward, and crucially, outward around its entire circumference. This is the same lateral thrust as in a simple arch, but magnified and radiating in every direction. The Roman solution was a masterpiece of graduated engineering and geometric cunning. They built the dome not as a uniform mass, but as a series of diminishing layers. The concrete at the base is thick and dense, mixed with heavy basalt aggregate to handle the maximum stress. As the dome rises, the builders lighten the load by switching the aggregate to progressively lighter materials, like pumice and porous volcanic tufa at the very top. Then they sculpted the ceiling itself. The famous coffers, those 5 rows of recessed square panels, are not merely decorative. Each coffer removes a precise volume of unnecessary concrete, significantly reducing the dome's total weight without compromising its structural integrity. They act like geometric relief valves, lightening the load while adding a rhythmic, harmonic pattern that draws the eye upward. And at the very summit, they placed the oculus, a perfect 27-foot wide opening to the sky. This is the stroke of genius. The oculus is not a structural compromise. It is the geometric and symbolic focal point. It eliminates the single weakest point of any dome, the apex, where compressive forces converge and where cracking would most likely begin. By opening it, they removed the problem entirely. The oculus also serves as the dome's only source of natural light, a beam that travels across the interior like a celestial sundial, connecting the human space below directly with the cosmos above. This reveals the ultimate integration. The interior space of the Pantheon is not just any volume, it is a perfect sphere. The height from the floor to the top of the dome is exactly equal to its diameter. If you completed the lower half of the sphere, it would fit perfectly beneath the floor. This means the entire building is an embodiment of the most perfect geometric form, a symbol of cosmic unity and harmony. The mathematics of hemispherical stress distribution and the philosophy of the celestial sphere became one and the same. The dome solved the monumental structural challenge by becoming the very image of the ordered universe it was meant to honor. In this one space, the arch's principle of channeled force, the corridor's psychology of guided movement, and the sacred geometry of the circle fuse into a single, breathtaking volume. Here, the hidden language of numbers found its most eloquent and enduring voice, speaking not of weight and thrust, but of heaven and earth held in perfect, permanent balance. While the dome perfected the sphere, another civilization mastered the curve of the sky. In the East, a different mathematical philosophy shaped the horizon, one that sought not to enclose the heavens, but to let architecture take flight. The silhouette of a Chinese pagoda, with its multiple tiers and elegantly upturned eaves, is a study in calculated grace. Those sweeping roof corners are not whimsical decoration. They are the endpoint of a hidden geometric engine known as the dugong. This ingenious system of interlocking wooden brackets is a masterpiece of modular mathematics. Each bracket set is a complex, three-dimensional puzzle of beams and blocks, carved to fit together without a single nail. Their primary function is structural, to transfer the immense weight of the heavy tiled roof outward, over the columns below, creating those signature dramatic overhangs that shelter the walls. But the mathematics go deeper. The dugong operates on a principle of progressive cantilevering, where each layer projects slightly further than the one below it. The angles and lengths of these components are precisely calculated, following generations of empirical formulas, to ensure the outward thrust is perfectly balanced by the downward load. This creates a roof that appears to float, as if the entire heavy crown of the building is effortlessly suspended. The curvature of the eaves themselves is also deliberate, a gentle upward flip that lightens the visual mass and directs rainwater away in a graceful arc. Here, sacred geometry manifests as rhythmic, organic growth, a wooden forest of brackets blossoming into a sheltering canopy. It is a distinct expression of balance, one that finds harmony in flexibility and layered complexity rather than monolithic solidity. This same reverence for cosmic order, expressed through a different geometric lens, shaped the stone mountains of India. A Hindu temple complex is not a building you simply enter, it is a universe you traverse. Its design follows the strict principles of the Vastu Purusha mandala, a cosmic diagram that maps the gods onto a geometric grid. The entire temple is laid out as a representation of the cosmos, with the central shrine, the Garbhagriha or womb chamber, symbolizing the axis of the world. The approach to this sacred heart is a meticulously calculated journey of axiality. Long, often colonnaded corridors and successive gateways align on a single, straight path, drawing the devotee inward and upward through a series of increasingly sacred spaces. At Khajuraho, this axial planning creates a powerful sequence. You move from the open worldly plaza, through an entrance hall, into a main hall, and finally to the small, dark inner sanctum. Each architectural transition is marked by a change in ceiling height, floor level, and spatial compression, all governed by proportional rules derived from the mandala. The corridors are not mere passages, they are stages of purification and preparation, their length and rhythm designed to slow the mind and body before the ultimate encounter. The temple itself, covered in intricate carvings, rises in a towering superstructure that replicates the sacred mountain of myth. Its form is generated by a complex geometry of stacked and rotated squares, creating a rhythmic, pulsating silhouette that seems to vibrate with spiritual energy. In the pagoda's curves and the temple's axial corridors, we see a shared global truth expressed through local dialect. Both systems rely on a deep, non-negotiable understanding of balance, sequence, and symbolic order. The Chinese builder calculated the thrust of a wooden eave with the same rigorous intent as the Indian stonemason, aligning a corridor to a celestial diagram. One saw geometry in the graceful resilience of a tree, the other in the eternal map of the gods. Together, they reveal that the hidden mathematics of monuments is not a single, rigid language, but a global tapestry of thought, where every culture wove its own profound equations into stone and wood, seeking to touch the infinite with the tools of reason and belief. But geometry could also dance. After the serene harmony of the Renaissance came a period of dramatic, emotional motion, where the solid, stable forms of sacred geometry were set into a breathtaking swirl. This was the Baroque era, and its architects wielded mathematics not to describe a perfect, static universe, but to capture the very feeling of divine energy in flux. They took the circle and the square and stretched them, compressed them, and set them in dynamic opposition. Figures like Francesco Borromini saw architecture not as frozen music, but as a symphony in the act of being performed. To achieve this, they turned to more complex, fluid, geometric figures, ovals, ellipses, and the sinuous line of the undulating wall. These shapes inherently suggest movement, a push and pull that makes a space feel alive. Nowhere is this more brilliantly realized than in Borromini's tiny masterpiece in Rome, the Church of San Carlo alle Quattro Fontane. From the outside, its facade ripples like a stone curtain caught in a gentle wind, with alternating convex and concave curves. But the true geometric revolution lies within. Step inside, and you are immediately enveloped in a space that defies simple description. The floor plan is not a circle or a rectangle, but a complex oval, a shape generated from two interlocking circles. This central oval is not simply placed within four walls, it is the very definition of the walls themselves. The entire interior space is a continuous, flowing perimeter where the walls themselves seem to breathe, swelling inward and outward in a rhythmic, organic pulse. This creates a profound sense of spatial fusion. The traditional separation between the long, processional corridor of the nave and the centralized dome above is dissolved. The space morphs seamlessly from one into the other, guiding your eye in a continuous upward spiral toward the intricate geometric pattern of the coffered dome. To design this, Bernini employed a level of geometric planning that was extraordinarily advanced for its time. Every curve, every inflection point was calculated with precision. The structural coherence of the entire building depended on a perfect understanding of how these opposing curves would distribute weight and thrust, locking each other into a state of dynamic equilibrium. The mathematics here served a new master drama. The numerical rules were not discarded, they were bent and stretched to serve emotion and spiritual fervor. The goal was to create an immersive environment of awe, where the faithful would feel not just the presence of the divine, but its overwhelming dynamic power. The walls do not enclose, they embrace. The space does not stand still, it flows around you. In this tiny church, the hidden language of numbers achieved a new kind of poetry, proving that the most rigorous calculations could be used to make stone itself seem to sway, to sigh, and to ascend. Yet if Baroque geometry danced with divine emotion, the pendulum of thought soon swung back toward cold, celestial reason. The swirling curves of Bernini's walls gave way to a new and severe language of form, one that saw mathematics not as a tool for passion, but as the very embodiment of pure intellect. This was neoclassicism, a philosophical and architectural revolution that emerged as a direct reaction to the perceived excess of the Baroque. It was fueled by a fresh wave of archaeological discoveries at sites like Pompeii and Herculaneum, which offered a clearer, more austere vision of the ancient world. Architects now looked past the Roman arch to the simpler, more primal geometries of the sphere, the cylinder, and the pyramid. In this movement, structural mathematics shed its ornament and became a stark manifesto for the Enlightenment, a declaration that universal laws of reason could be built and that those buildings could shape a better society. No one embodied this radical idealism more than the French visionary Étienne-Louis Boulay. Though most of his monumental designs remained on paper, they represent perhaps the purest fusion of geometric form and philosophical concept ever conceived. His most famous project, the Cenotaph for Sir Isaac Newton, is not a building in any traditional sense. It is a thought experiment rendered in ink, a temple to human reason itself. The design is staggeringly simple and overwhelmingly vast, a hollow sphere over 400 feet in diameter, resting within a cylindrical base ringed with cypress trees. The sphere, the most perfect of all geometric forms, symbolizes the cosmos that Newton's laws had explained. Its interior is a celestial vault, with small holes pierced in the upper shell to mimic the night sky, while a giant central sphere representing the sun could be lowered to create the illusion of daylight or raised to reveal the stars. Here, the mathematics of structure serve a sublime, almost terrifying purpose. The sheer scale and perfect curvature are calculated to evoke what Boulay called the poetry of architecture, a feeling of awe not before a god, but before the sublime power of human reason to comprehend the universe. This was mathematics as a language of intellectual statement. The perfect sphere expressed an Enlightenment ideal, universal, immutable, and governed by discoverable laws. Boulay's other designs, like his project for a metropolitan church or a royal library, employed the same vocabulary of stark, elementary volumes, massive pyramids, endless colonnades, and soaring cylindrical drums. Ornament was banished. The power of the architecture derived solely from proportion, scale, and the emotional impact of pure geometry. In these visions, the corridor transforms as well. It is no longer a dynamic, twisting space of revelation, but a stark, processional axis. Think of long, unadorned galleries with perfect symmetry, where rows of identical columns or piers create a rhythmic, marching cadence. This axial symmetry was itself a mathematical principle, a manifestation of balance and order that left no room for the unpredictable or the emotional. The corridor became a rational path, leading the citizen with logical inevitability toward a central, significant space, a library, a legislative chamber, a tomb of a great thinker. This architectural philosophy was deeply political. In the wake of revolutions, these clear, rational forms were seen as the appropriate language for a new, enlightened society. They spoke of transparency, equality before the law, and the triumph of reason over superstition. The stark geometry of a neoclassical courthouse or parliament building was meant to visually communicate these values. The mathematics of load and thrust were still impeccably solved, but they were now clothed in a form that declared its own logic. The arch, if used, was stripped back to its essential semicircle. The dome became a perfect hemisphere. Every line was deliberate, every proportion derived from classical precedent and rational calculation. In this sweeping return to order, structural mathematics proved it could be more than a hidden framework for beauty or a tool for spiritual awe. It could be a bold, public language, a way to build an argument for a new world, using the timeless, silent authority of the sphere, the line, and the perfect, unchanging angle. The stark geometry of neoclassicism spoke of a perfect, reasoned world, but a new material was about to shatter every rule of that world's construction. The 19th century did not just introduce new buildings, it introduced a new element, iron, and later its refined sibling, steel. These were not materials that simply bore weight, they transformed the very language of structural mathematics. For millennia, architecture had been a conversation with compression, the art of stacking and channeling downward force. Stone and brick excel at this, but they have a fatal weakness. They are brittle and fail under tension, the pulling or stretching force. Iron and steel changed the equation. They possessed incredible tensile strength, the ability to resist being pulled apart. This single property liberated the architect's imagination from the tyranny of the thick, load-bearing wall. Now, mathematics could explore forms that were once pure fantasy, forms that danced with tension as much as compression. The first breathtaking expressions of this new freedom were not temples or palaces, but cathedrals of the machine age, the great railway termini. Step inside the train shed of London's St. Pancras station, completed in 1868. Look up. The space that envelops you is a single, breathtaking volume, a glass-vaulted corridor of staggering scale. Its roof is not held up by rows of arches in the traditional sense, but by a soaring, delicate web of iron ribs. The shape of these ribs is critical. They often follow a parabolic or catenary curve. A parabola is the curve you see in a thrown ball's arc. A catenary is the natural curve of a hanging chain, perfectly shaped by gravity. These are not arbitrary choices. They are mathematically optimal forms for a structure made of metal. In a hanging chain, every link is in pure tension. Flip that chain upside down, and you have an arch in pure compression. For iron, which handles both forces brilliantly, these curves became the ideal way to span vast distances with minimal material. The mathematics of the catenary allowed engineers to calculate precisely how to shape the iron ribs so that the forces flowed through them with perfect efficiency, eliminating wasteful bulk. The result was a structural skeleton of astonishing lightness and strength. This skeleton, in turn, could be infilled not with stone, but with glass, creating those luminous, transparent vaults. The monumental corridor was reborn, no longer a dark, processional path, but a public concourse flooded with daylight, a space of movement and modernity. This was the pivotal shift, the moment when the mathematics of form began to follow the inherent logic of the material itself, rather than forcing a material to conform to ancient geometric ideals. Iron and steel were not just new tools, they were new alphabets for an entirely different architectural sentence, one that would soon write itself across the sky. Iron and glass had built cathedrals of light, but a new century demanded a language of radical honesty. The modernist movement of the 20th century performed a dramatic act of architectural stripping, peeling away centuries of ornament to reveal the bare bones of geometry itself. Here, mathematics was no longer a hidden framework or a symbolic code. It became the explicit, celebrated face of the building. Form was not just following function, it was declaring it with the stark clarity of a cube, a cylinder, or a floating plane. This was geometry as pure idea, a tool to build not just structures but an entirely new world. At the forefront stood figures like Le Corbusier, who sought nothing less than a universal architectural language. He developed a system called the Modular, a harmonic scale of proportions based on the human figure, and, once again, the timeless golden ratio. Imagine a 6-foot man with his arm raised, inscribed within a square and a series of regulating lines. This silhouette became a living ruler. Le Corbusier used this proportional system to design everything from mass-produced apartment units to the breathtaking chapel of Notre Dame du Haut at Ronchamp. Every dimension, from the height of a ceiling to the width of a window, could be derived from this human-centered grid, creating spaces that felt intuitively scaled to the body, yet ordered by a cosmic mathematics. This philosophy reshaped the very experience of moving through a building. The traditional corridor was reimagined as a promenade architecturale, an architectural promenade. This was no longer a mere passageway but a sequenced cinematic journey. In Le Corbusier's Villa Savoy, you do not simply walk from room to room. You are guided along a ramp that spirals up through the house, framing carefully composed views of the landscape and the interior itself. The path is choreographed with walls and windows acting as cinematic cuts and reveals. The mathematics of the plan dictates a narrative of movement where space unfolds in time, much like scenes in a film. This was architecture as a directed experience, using pure geometric forms to orchestrate perception and discovery. The material that made this new language possible was reinforced concrete. This composite material, with steel bars embedded within the concrete, combined the compressive strength of stone with the tensile strength of metal. It was a plastic, liquid stone that could be poured into any geometric shape imaginable. This allowed modernist architects to assemble their pure forms in daring new ways. They could create long, horizontal planes that seemed to float freely, supported by a grid of slender pilotis or columns. They could cantilever entire sections of a building out into space, defying gravity with clean, geometric lines. The mathematics was now focused on calculating these unprecedented spans and cantilevers, on ensuring the steel within the concrete was precisely placed to handle every stress point. The result was a new kind of monumentality, one not of carved stone and grand facades, but of abstract, whitewashed volumes assembled under the sun. The mathematics was no longer hidden in the curve of an arch or the pattern of a vault. It was the stark, visible truth of the structure itself. A building's skeleton, its system of proportion, its very rationale for being were all laid bare. This celebrated geometry promoted a machine-age ideal of efficiency, hygiene, and universalism. It was a declaration that through rational design and pure form, architecture could forge a better, more equitable way of living. In these stark white cubes and soaring ramps, the ancient dialogue between number and stone reached its most abstract and ideological chapter, suggesting that the ultimate function of geometry might be to build utopia itself. Yet the stark geometry of modernism was a final, beautiful pause before the rules dissolved entirely. Today, the ancient dialogue between mathematics and monument has entered a new, almost alchemical phase. The compass and the rope have been replaced by lines of code, and the sacred ratios now unfold in the silent, lightning-fast logic of algorithms. This is the era of parametric design, where architecture is no longer merely drawn or even constructed, but computationally grown. In this digital frontier, the very definition of an arch or a corridor is being rewritten. Instead of a builder sketching a single, fixed curve, a designer now writes a set of rules, a generative algorithm. This algorithm defines relationships, for instance, how the curvature of a wall might respond to structural load, sunlight intensity, or even pedestrian flow patterns. Change one parameter, like the desired interior height, and the entire form evolves organically, recalculating every surface, every beam, every connection in a cascade of digital possibility. This allows for the creation of forms of breathtaking complexity and fluidity that would have been mathematically inconceivable, let alone buildable, just a generation ago. Consider the Heydar Aliyev Center in Baku, designed by Zaha Hadid architects. From a distance, it appears as a single, continuous ribbon of white, flowing from the ground into a soaring roof without a single traditional column or beam to interrupt its sweep. It is an arch evolved into a landscape, a corridor melted into a plaza. This was not sculpted by hand, but born from parametric algorithms. The design team defined the core functional and spatial requirements, and then used computational tools to generate the building's skin as a continuous, structurally optimized surface. The algorithms solved for how to make that impossibly thin, curving shell stand up, how to channel forces through its folds, and how to manufacture each unique panel with precision. The mathematics is utterly embedded, invisible in the final form yet fundamental to its existence. It is a structure where every curve is a calculated response to a physical law, and no two moments are exactly alike. This represents the most profound shift yet in our story. For millennia, architects used mathematics to solve the problems presented by their chosen forms. Now, the mathematics itself generates the optimal form in response to a set of problems. Corridors in such buildings are no longer planned passages, but emergent spaces carved by light and movement within the algorithmic whole. They feel less built and more discovered, like caves in a digitally formed geology. This new chapter pushes the very boundaries of what architecture can be, creating spaces that are at once deeply efficient, resonantly organic, and breathtakingly new. It suggests a future where our most monumental spaces may not be monuments to a single idea, but to the boundless potential of a conversation between human intention and the generative power of the code we write. The Pantheon is not just a building, it is a single, solved equation. For over 1900 years, its unreinforced concrete dome has hovered over Rome, a testament to a holistic genius that wove sacred geometry, material science, and cosmic symbolism into one unified masterpiece. To stand beneath it is to step inside a perfect sphere of space, where every architectural principle we have explored finds its ultimate expression. The interior volume is a geometric revelation, a cylinder capped by a hemisphere where the height from the floor to the top of the dome is exactly equal to the cylinder's diameter. If you were to complete the lower half of the sphere, it would fit perfectly beneath your feet. This perfect spherical interior was not an aesthetic whim, it was a profound philosophical statement, a representation of the cosmos itself, with humanity at the very center of a mathematically ordered universe. That cosmic symbolism was built with breathtakingly pragmatic engineering. The dome itself is a marvel of calculated reduction. Look up at the 5 rows of recessed, square panels, the coffers. They are not merely decorative. Each coffer removes a precise volume of heavy concrete, significantly lightening the dome's total mass without compromising the structural integrity of its curved shell. This was a geometric optimization performed in stone and mortar, a way to sculpt away unnecessary weight while maintaining the continuous arch action that channels force downward. The thickness of the dome is not uniform, it graduates with intelligent precision. At its base, where the compressive and lateral stresses are greatest, the concrete is a dense, formidable 20 feet thick, mixed with heavy basalt aggregate. As the dome sweeps upward, the builders lighten the load, switching the aggregate to progressively lighter materials like pumice and porous volcanic tufa at the very summit. This material gradient was a stroke of engineering foresight, a literal recipe for stability where the mix itself was tuned to the mathematical demands of the form. Then there is the oculus, the great 27-foot wide eye open to the sky. This is the masterstroke that unites symbol and structure. Symbolically, it is the building's sole source of natural light, a beam that travels like a celestial sundial across the interior, connecting the human space directly with the heavens. Structurally, it is a geometric solution to the dome's greatest weakness, the apex. In any solid dome, the apex is the point where compressive forces converge, a natural focal point for potential cracking and failure. By opening it, the Roman engineers eliminated the problem entirely. The oculus transforms the dome from a closed compression ring into a continuous, open hoop, a shape inherently more stable under its own weight. The rain that falls through it is channeled away by a nearly imperceptible slope in the marble floor, and the acoustics within the rotunda are shaped by this perfect geometry, where whispers can carry with an ethereal clarity around the circular space. How did they calculate all of this without modern tools? The answer lies in a deep, empirical understanding of proportion and material behavior, passed down through generations of builders. They used full-scale geometric drawings on tracing floors, modular planning grids, and a vast repository of knowledge about concrete curing and aggregate performance. The Pantheon's proportions, likely derived from simple, constructible geometries like the square and the circle, ensured that the lines of thrust from the dome flowed smoothly down into the thick cylindrical drum and into the earth. It is a building where every element, from the symbolic sphere to the pragmatic coffer, serves a dual purpose. The mathematics of sacred harmony became the mathematics of load distribution. The poetry of light became the physics of structural integrity. In this one silent space, the entire hidden language of ancient architecture speaks in a single, coherent, and utterly breathtaking sentence. But the Pantheon's unity is a single, solved equation. The Gothic cathedral is a sprawling, living proof. It trades the serene, contained sphere for a forest of stone calculus, a three-dimensional puzzle where every rib, arch, and lever is a visible term in a monumental equation of forces. If the Pantheon embodies holistic unity, a cathedral like Amiens in France reveals an additive, skeletal logic, a structure that openly diagrams its own struggle against gravity. To understand it, you must slice through its cross-section, reading it like a mathematical manuscript. At ground level, the massive pointed arches of the arcade march down the nave, channeling the weight of the roof downward. Above them, often hidden in shadow, runs the triforium, a narrow, vaulted corridor literally built within the thickness of the wall itself. This is not a space for people, but for structure, a secret passageway for forces, stiffening the inner wall and providing a platform for the next leap upward. And above that, the walls dissolve into the clerestory, those towering windows of stained glass that flood the space with celestial light. This vertical stack arcade, triforium, clerestory, is a graduated system of support and liberation. But the true genius, the element that makes this fragile cage of glass and stone possible, lies outside. Step into the ambulatory and look through the outer wall. You will see the flying buttress, perhaps the most elegant application of leverage ever built in stone. It is an arch externalized, turned on its side. One end is anchored in a massive pier of solid masonry far from the main wall, a block of stability. The other end leaps through the air to connect high up on the cathedral's side, precisely at the point where the vault's thrust pushes outward. This stone arm acts as a perfect lever. The weight of the solid pier counteracts the outward thrust of the vault, pushing back against it and pinning the high wall in place. The entire cathedral becomes a dynamic equilibrium, a tense balance of opposing forces made breathtakingly visible. Each flying buttress is a counterweight, each rib in the vault a carefully drawn line of compression. The medieval masons, working from geometric intuition and generations of empirical knowledge, understood this calculus in their bones. They turned faith into a physical diagram, building a mountain of stone that sought not to enclose the heavens, but to evaporate before them. In this skeletal forest, the hidden mathematics of the arch finally stepped out into the light, proving that the greatest strength could lie in admitting weakness and channeling it into stone levers that reached for the sky. That skeletal forest of stone raises a haunting question for our modern minds. Did the master masons who built it possess a secret, lost science, a theoretical knowledge that has since vanished from the earth? Or were they simply brilliant artisans, guided by generations of trial, error, and a deep, intuitive feel for their materials? The truth, as we piece it together from tool marks, sketchbooks, and fragments of text, is more fascinating than either pure myth or cold calculation. It points to a third path, a form of knowledge where theory and practice were not separate disciplines, but a single, lived craft. Consider the surviving sketchbooks of medieval masons, like the notebook of Villard de Honnecourt from the 13th century. Its pages are not filled with equations or stress diagrams as we would draw them. Instead, they show geometric constructions, intricate patterns generated with only a compass and a straight edge. He draws a method for squaring a circle, a classic geometric puzzle, and diagrams for designing window tracery and lifting devices. This is not abstract mathematics for its own sake. It is applied geometry, a visual toolkit. The knowledge was procedural, a series of steps to achieve a desired form that they knew from experience would stand. They thought in shapes and relationships, not in the algebraic notation we use today. We see this same practical wisdom etched into the stones themselves. On the floors of great cathedrals, archaeologists have found full-scale geometric drawings incised into the plaster. The tracing floors where master masons plotted out the complex curves of vaults and arches. These drawings are the direct link between the idea and the monument, a one-to-one map where the theoretical geometry became a physical template for cutting stone. The builders may not have articulated the law of the lever in a textbook, but their flying buttresses are perfect demonstrations of it. They may not have derived the catenary curve through calculus, but the shape of a perfectly balanced stone arch often mirrors it. Modern engineering software, when used to analyze these ancient structures, frequently confirms their astonishing efficiency, the lines of stress flowing cleanly through the masonry as if placed there by design. This suggests their empirical methods had stumbled upon, or perhaps consciously refined, optimal solutions. So what were the guarded secrets of the Masons' Guild? They were likely less about mysterious formulas and more about this holistic, culturally embedded understanding. The secret was the complete system, the way sacred proportion, material behavior, site orientation, and construction sequencing were woven together into a single act of creation. It was knowledge passed not through lectures but through apprenticeship, through the feel of a chisel striking stone at the correct angle, through the ritual of laying a foundation stone at an astronomically significant moment. The geometry was inseparable from its purpose, whether that purpose was to channel divine light or to withstand a winter gale. We are, in a sense, still learning their language. We can now analyze the Pantheon's dome with finite element analysis and confirm its gradients of concrete are perfectly tuned to the stress distribution. We can model the acoustics of a whispering gallery with wave equations, but this often feels like translating a beautiful poem word by word, understanding the dictionary definitions but perhaps missing the deeper rhythm that guided its composition. The rediscovery happening today is not of lost numbers but of a lost mindset, one that saw no divide between the mathematical, the material, and the meaningful. It challenges our modern fragmentation of knowledge, reminding us that the most enduring truths are often those built not just with the mind, but with the hands, the eyes, and a profound respect for the silent logic of the world. The stones of the Colosseum hold a conversation with the steel of a modern skyscraper. This is the enduring legacy of that hidden mathematical language, a continuity that stretches from quarried granite to lines of generative code. The principles that channeled force through a Roman arch are not relics. They are the very same physics that engineers use today to design buildings that can sway with an earthquake rather than shatter against it. The rhythmic sequence of a Gothic cathedral's bays, designed to guide the spirit, now shapes the efficient, predictable flow of thousands of people through a subway station or an airport terminal every hour. The ancient dialogue between form and force has become the foundational grammar for our contemporary world. This living language now speaks in the planning of entire cities. The use of proportion and axial sequence to shape human experience, once reserved for sacred processions, is applied by urban designers to create neighborhoods that feel intuitively navigable and psychologically welcoming. A museum's layout, leading visitors on a curated journey from darkness into light, from compression to revelation, directly employs the same corridor dynamics mastered in Egyptian tombs and Renaissance palaces. Even in the intangible realm of virtual reality, designers use these age-old principles of spatial compression, rhythmic pacing, and forced perspective to build convincing, emotionally resonant digital worlds that guide our attention and shape our immersion. The monument is no longer just a building. It is any intentionally designed space, physical or virtual, that uses geometry to choreograph our presence. As we face the profound challenges of this century, building resilient, sustainable, and densely populated cities for a growing world, this legacy offers not just inspiration but profound insight. The ancient wisdom of passive stability, of designing forms that work with natural forces like gravity and light rather than constantly fighting them with energy-intensive systems, is being rediscovered. Modern architects armed with computational tools are now analyzing the thermal mass of ancient walls, the natural ventilation of traditional wind catchers, and the solar orientation of prehistoric settlements. They are asking how the timeless principles of proportion and harmony can create human-scale density that feels abundant, not oppressive. The future of our habitats may well be written in a fusion of algorithmic precision and ancestral intuition. True innovation, it seems, is rarely a rupture from the past, but a deep and listening dialogue with it. The next monumental arch may be a carbon-negative bridge grown from mycelium, and the next great corridor may be a greenway threading through a vertical forest city. Yet their underlying logic, their silent mathematics of stability, sequence, and human experience, will echo the same eternal conversation between number and nature that began with a master mason's rope and a wedge of stone. The legacy is alive, reminding us that to build for the future, we must first understand the enduring language whispered by the stones of time. That silent calculus of stone is a crystallized intelligence, a language written not in words but in weight and light. Our journey reveals that every great monument is far more than a pile of rock. It is a physical manifesto of a timeless human quest, the urge to understand and shape space through the universal grammar of number. From the patient, intuitive stacking of a corbelled vault to the breathtaking algorithmic flows of a parametric facade, the structural mathematics underlying arches and corridors is a continuous thread woven through the entire tapestry of our cultural story. It teaches us a profound and elegant truth that beauty and stability are not separate ideals, but two inseparable faces of the same geometric coin. One cannot exist without the other, for a form that stands for millennia must resonate with a harmony that our deepest intuition recognizes. So the next time you pass beneath an ancient archway or walk the length of a grand, echoing corridor, pause for a moment, look beyond the weathered surface. Remember the hidden equations that hold it aloft, the silent conversation between thrust and counter-thrust, between compression and tension, between the finite limits of material and the infinite reach of a human idea. That stone holds a story of discovery, a legacy of minds that dared to calculate the impossible and build it. If this exploration of hidden histories and silent languages resonated with you, we invite you to join us for more journeys into the past's deepest mysteries. Please subscribe to stay connected and share your thoughts below. Which architectural marvel from any corner of the world puzzles or inspires you the most? We would love to continue this conversation.